It's.
I'll try to speak up.
That was a little clearer. It's a little, yeah. Okay. Let me know when we're ready. It looks like we might be. Super. So good evening, everybody. This is the Public Works Committee meeting for January 6, 2022. It's 5:01, so we're going to get started this evening with roll call.
Sorry, I'm looking from home. I actually have to hit the record button. It looks like the Knutsons are coming on too, so maybe we'll just.
Oh, not recorded. Yeah, I see it. Okay, that works. I see we're live, but not recording. Let me know when you're.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Chair Biscoe.
Okay, we'll start all over. All right. Good evening, everybody. My name is Catherine Biscoe, City Councilor of Philomath and Chair of the Public Works Committee. And this evening, you're joining us for the Public Works Committee of January 6, 2022. We'll get started this evening at 5:02 with roll call.
Ruth Causey.
Here.
Jessica Andrade.
Present.
And Catherine Biscoe.
Here. So our first order. Oh, excuse me. Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to recognize Kristen and Mark Knutson are on the call, and then Chris Workman, City Manager, here for staff.
Very good. And for clarification, you said we would not have anyone from the City Attorney's Office.
Correct.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll get started with our first order of business, which is the approval of the meeting minutes. I actually see that we had some amendments to those minutes come through. I believe in, no, I'm sorry, I don't have that information. I do want to say this. I once again, in reviewing the minutes, a little bit concerned about some of the context that's present, and just want to note, actually, I'm not prepared to approve these minutes this evening for those reasons, although I will allow the other committee members to weigh in on that after sharing my concerns. I did note that there's two corrections that I would like to point out, whether we address them this evening or we address them at the next review. On page 2, line 8, in the second, that's the middle of this line, it says she described, so it's speaking to myself, it says she described confusion about the LID process. And then it goes on to say the approval of the capital improvement plan and the multiple funding options for the LID that have been provided. I do want to clarify that, and this is not the first time that the word confusing has been used. It's not a word generally that I use or choose to use. In the context of this, it would be confusion on a city council level. There appears to be lack of clarity is my preference of word, I guess. So my amendment would be a lack of clarity and overall council confusion if we choose to use the word confusion. And that was reflected at the December council meeting, in that we have still not until that meeting determined that the council has not yet even made a motion to move forward on an LID. So because that's not verbatim, that's a change. And then also line 10 is again referring to a statement that, a summary statement. So she described issues with the Heather Glen subdivision participation in an LID, etc. I'd like to see the word issues. It's not generally a word that I prefer. I prefer the word concern. And I would like to see that word changed to concern, because I think concerns are more specific to myself rather than making claims that there are issues that suggest a fact rather than a concern, for lack of a better word. So those two things. I do want to point out that at the risk of however this wants to be framed, I did feel that I think it's difficult anytime that we call out an individual, and in the case of Councillor Quasi calling out the Knutson's development and the affordable housing engagement by name, that's reflected in these minutes, and the minutes are all that ultimately stands for records. There was no recording in this minutes of the Knutson's clarification. And in that case, I understand that we had not planned to have engagement from outside parties of the committee. However, when somebody is making a statement that may or may not be true, That was afforded in the case of that meeting, and I do think it's important to capture that in the minutes. And then the other issue that I have considerable concern with is that in the whole context of this last meeting, there were 4 separate times in these minutes that Councillor Causey is cited as requesting, let's see what they say, requested Mr. Workman provide a review of the options. To the point of those comments, those 4 requests came within the first 18 paragraphs of this document. There are 40 paragraphs capturing our whole meeting. I did in fact acknowledge it between request number 1 and number 2. However, as the chair of this committee and knowing that council tasked us to actually do alternative funding, trying to steer it back to that conversation was part of the context. But also there were discussions to be had. And I do believe that a committee is about having conversations with the committee members, not just getting a presentation from staff. So I'm concerned that that was called out that way. What was not called out, and what I'm making the point to here with the minutes, is that Mr. Workman was given an opportunity to present and he declined that. And that's not captured anywhere in the minutes that I can see that. So at this time, I'm not prepared to move the motions, not prepared. Matter of fact, I'm just not prepared to accept a motion to accept these minutes as they stand. I think they require a review. Once again, this is not the first time for these committee minutes. To the point of that, it literally takes a review of a 2-hour meeting. It takes a 1-hour review of the minutes ahead of time and then some sort of statement afterwards. Councillor Andrade.
Would you be interested in us voting on those two amendments that you made and then sending it back for
I'm okay with
additional?
that.
Okay, I make a motion to make those amendments to that Chair Bisco suggested to the December 2nd, 2021 Public Works Committee meeting minutes, and that the minutes go back for review and those suggestions that she stated.
I'll second that motion. And we'll take a vote then. So all those in favor of those 2 amendments?
May we have an opportunity for discussion, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Given the, I guess, breadth of your concerns or issues with the minutes, I would like to go back and listen to the recording of the meeting again and review the minutes again in context alongside that recording before we review them further.
So back, I appreciate that. Thank you, Councillor Causey. I too, and it's an amazing amount of time that it takes to do that, but there are just key components of these minutes that are not represented in the minutes. So happy to allow that opportunity, but to the point of the motion to make those 2 amendments, there's a vote on before us on those amendments. So is there some reason, Councillor Causey, that you feel we cannot make that motion? Because the review will be afforded.
So you're just to review the 2 amendments you mentioned. One was concerns with the Heather Glen as opposed to the word issue.
Page 2, line 6 is
And the
changing.
other,
Yeah.
go ahead.
So page 2, line 6, changing the word confusion to lack of clarity and overall.
Line 8.
Excuse me. It's too far away. My apologies. Line 8. Lack of clarity and overall council. So either lack of clarity and just leave it, or lack of clarity and actually lack of clarity and overall council confusion, because it comes across as though it's my confusion. I'm certainly not confused about what I am understanding and reviewing about these LIDs, and I wouldn't want it to suggest that, and that's to me what it reads as. And then line 10 is changing the word, replacing the word issues with the word concerns. So it would be just those 2 changes so that those are captured in this meeting. And then to whatever extent, go ahead.
Once again, I'd like to ask if I could take those 2 changes in consideration in reviewing the full minutes rather than just incorporate 2 changes and go back and review the full minutes. I'll defer to the committee based on your vote.
At this point, you're welcome to do that, but I'd like this motion to stand. I'm concerned about a statement that suggests that I'm saying something that I don't feel that I would. And there's certain words that I tend to use and many that I don't. And I see often words in these minutes that are not words that I characterize the kind of language or words that I would say. This seems like one of those situations. It's important to clarify. I would prefer that we establish this in this meeting. So I'll take a vote on the motion. So all those in favor of those 2 amendments to the minutes and allowing a review of the remainder of the minutes, please vote by raising your hand saying aye, and all those opposed. Okay. So motion carries on those 2 amendments. Again, of importance is I do think, so I guess, Chris, my ask would be that staff goes back and reviews, and if I'm incorrect, I'll be willing to accept that, but I do believe that Knutson's did make a clarification on the affordable housing statement that was made by Councillor Causey, and I do believe you were given the opportunity to speak to your recommendations, and neither of those appear to be in this space. Go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, or we can't hear you.
All right, sorry. With any of those, can you hear me now, okay?
Yes, thank you.
With any of those concerns, have you made an effort to reach out to Ruth Post, the city recorder, on any of those issues?
So I have opportunity and have done so with some of these issues, but to be very honest with you, again, like I said, it takes about 4 hours to get from beginning to end of this process. That's a heavy lift. And no, I have not asked on these 2 particular topics. So the correction on those other words, yes. I know Ruth Post and I have had some conversations back and forth about concerns of context of minutes, which I think it's important are balanced, and sometimes they feel very one-sided, and certain choices of words that are capturing summaries don't always capture the sentiment. And I think that's why we continue to come back to this space. And this has not been a new space. This is something that goes all the way back to February of this year. So I appreciate that ask.
Yeah, I've been copied on a number of those emails, and I think the repeated ask, and I'll ask again on behalf of staff, is that if there's concerns about minutes, that you contact staff before the meeting and address those concerns. And a lot of times they can be clarified before the meeting starts, and we can get written statements out ahead of time. And then we don't have to spend so much time in meetings going through this process. So I would just reiterate the ask again, that if there's issues with the minutes and you know them prior to the meeting, that you contact staff ahead of the meeting so we can talk through them and see the best process going forward.
And I acknowledge that, and we've had that conversation with City Council as well. And in this case, that opportunity was not afforded. Councillor Andrade?
I just wanted to state the fact that, I mean, I wasn't able to look at the minutes until today. So just to keep that in mind, I would like staff to keep that in mind as well, that those of us who are working a lot and such can't necessarily reach out ahead of time.
Thank you. And Chris, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Right. I didn't realize you weren't quite finished. Chris, was there something you wanted to?
No, that's fine.
Okay. And so, and I do appreciate that ask and that opportunity. And again, Ruth has been very good about that. But it literally takes a review of all of these meetings. Review the minutes first. If you have to go back and listen to audio and then you're crafting some sort of statement and email communication, it's quite a heavy lift. I would like to think that our minutes were more reflective of our meetings on a more consistent basis. And then also we wouldn't have to come back to these conversations. So with that, we'll move on from the approval of. So we're not joined by our tree board members. Under Public Works business, There are a couple different agenda items. The first one being the unimproved streets funding options. I know Councilor Causey, you forwarded information for us to consider at the meeting this evening about the packet information that is provided, gas tax revenues, some information from League of Oregon Cities, and I'm happy to allow you that opportunity to share to that if you would like to do that and are willing to do so.
Perhaps it would be appropriate to review. I'd be happy to do that if you'd like me to do so now. I just wonder if it would be appropriate to review the other funding mechanisms first before we go to gas taxes.
My apologies for not being more clear in setting that up. I had asked at the last meeting for what I thought we had done a summary at our last meeting or the previous meeting, but I think it was the last one that had really drilled down on just a handful of recommendations. And I had asked for staff some sort of summary of that. What instead we got was the same October information that we had that includes things like reimbursement districts that we'd already concluded were not preferred or viable options for this type of funding. Certainly not ones that we would prioritize as top on that list. So I don't have any working documents to work with. That is a current review document. In looking at that, we had, again, the October 19th agenda item summary from staff talks about reimbursement districts, separate road districts. Both of those are not functional. General fund dollars, we'd considered including that as a summary to the council. Increased utility fees were not off the table, but not probably preferred, as I recall. A citywide local option levy, of course, requires participation by the taxpayers in the city of Philomath. And local improvement districts, we did have conversations that aren't summarized here either, that included whether we did segmented local improvement districts and some of that other discussion that happened with Council Brewer, and that is in the minutes from the last meeting. So I don't have a current document for us to review outside of what we've already talked about, which is what led me to Councilor Causey. If you would like to present the gas tax conversation that you had shared with this group via email, so we were prepared for that discussion, I'm happy to have you do that.
So my email of January 5th, I just summarized some conclusions I drew from the information that was provided in our packets. And my primary objective here was to determine the magnitude of revenues that we might expect from the gas tax if that were implemented. And there were 4 communities that had provided 2006, 2007 revenues. I assume that represented a single fiscal year. So I took those figures and divided it by the number of gas stations in each community and by the number of cents that was applied in the gas tax. And so that resulted in 4 figures you see there for Eugene, Sandy, Springfield, and Tillamook. Now, granted, this obviously incorporates a number of gross assumptions because taking all other things equal, including the population and the traffic patterns in the community, but it does give us some kind of a gross estimate. So we have 4 gas stations in our community, as far as I know, 2 of which are generally open to the public, the Mobile and the Chevron, and the other 2 are card lock stations. So if I applied the range above, multiplied that by 4 for the number of stations, I got a range of $36,000 to $84,000 per cent imposed. And I'd like to thank Kristen Knudsen for the League of Oregon Cities article that she provided, which included a figure for sisters, which may be a good benchmark for us being a relatively similar community on Highway 20. which had projected 2019-2020 gas tax revenues of 170,000, or 14 cents imposed, or $14,000 per cent imposed. They have a 3-cent gas tax. So using this information, I estimated that we would derive $100,000 to $250,000 annually based on a 3-cent per gallon tax. Now, it's the information that Chris provided was obviously quite dated. And as we move away from gasoline-powered engines, this will probably become a less viable funding source. And additionally, because more wealthy individuals are probably more likely to buy hybrid and electric vehicles, we're also imposing a tax on lower income individuals potentially. So, but my point is, I guess the first question one thinks about when you consider imposing a new tax is the magnitude of revenue going to be worthwhile? And so if we were to say, gain $250,000 a year from a gas tax, we have 5 high priority street projects, which based on the information provided at our last meeting, total roughly $3.8 to $4.4 million in costs to improve those streets. So while the income derived from gas tax is not inconsequential, it's certainly not going to help us address these projects quickly. And I think we need to take that into consideration when we determine whether this is something that we could get the voters to support, which is now required under Oregon law.
Thank you, Councillor Quasi. Councillor Andrade.
So this will kind of dovetail a bit into the 11th Street situation, only because it has to do with how soon we'll be doing a project and whether or not gas tax can help with that project sooner than later. And this question is going to be for Chris. So if I remember correctly, at the last meeting, I think I remember you saying that one or both, either the water line and the sewer line have been, like, we don't need to replace them, or kind of implied that we didn't need to replace them. But when I look at the CIP that we passed this year, it shows that both of those need to be upsized. And it looks like there's money put towards those, but it looks like it looks like the engineering happened this last fiscal year, the 2021 to 2022, and that the building is supposed to happen 2022, 2023. So I guess it seems like the street would have to be torn up if we were to, build the street, improve the street on North 11th Street, and then do it all over again with the water and sewer lines. Am I reading that correctly?
Yeah, you are, and I'll apologize. That was in response to a question that Councillor Cos had given me, and I think I was thinking of Landmark Drive or confusing the two at the time, but you're correct. For this project on 11th Street, there's a water line project and a sewer line project. They're both upsizing, so there was never any intent to have that be part of the local improvement district. Those are just city projects that the city will pay for with street funds and sewer funds. The intent is to do those at the same time that you do the street project. We wouldn't do them over separate years or separate projects. They'd all get done at the same time. And on the years, you're right, in the capital improvement plan, those projects are listed. The fiscal years are a little funky because typically a construction season is over the summer and it usually spans 2 fiscal years. The intent with this project was to do construction this summer, which would be fiscal year 2020, 2021. And then after July, it becomes fiscal year 2021, 2022. So the intent was, or excuse me, 2022, 2023 actually. So it's listed. We basically took the total cost of the project and divided it between this fiscal year, next fiscal year, recognizing it was going to happen this summer.
Okay, so it's not a big deal that we don't have the entire cost for at least the water line when it starts to be built.
We have the funds there. So if you look at the capital improvement plan.
So it says that we'd be allocating 110,000 this next fiscal year, 22 to 23.
Right, 110 this fiscal year, right? So 110 this fiscal year and 110 next fiscal year. So the total project's 220, then it's just split between this year and next year.
Yeah, but my question was, so we don't need to have the entire amount ready once we start the project?
No, as long as it's, as long as we know that it's going to be in the budget for next year, if we're not going to put the money in the budget, the 2021-22 budget, or excuse me, in the 2022-2023 budget, if we're not going to put that money there, then yeah, we shouldn't start the project this summer. But that's why we have the capital improvement plan, is so we know how much money we need the budget next fiscal year, because we've got a project that's halfway paid for this fiscal year, halfway paid for next fiscal year.
So we're going to have to rely on this next Public Works Committee to pass the CIP with that allocation in order to not default on it, I guess. Okay.
Yeah, well, in order to have money in the budget to pay for the project, right? So I think that it needs to be approved in the budget. Yeah. But while you're looking at the capital improvement plan, and you kind of referenced 11th Street LID a little bit, I think a bigger point that's been lost in this, and I'm probably as much to blame if anybody's to blame, it's me. I think that's been something that's been lost in the discussions about local improvement on North 11th Street, is the notion that if we don't do a local improvement district on North 11th Street, then we don't have any money to do the project. And that's not necessarily the case. The intent of the local improvement district was so that the properties that were most benefiting from the improvements would be paying, their share of those improvements. But the reality is, if you look at a capital improvement plan and you look at both on the water and on the sewer and on the street, the anticipation is that we would be using reserve funds, both, sewer reserve funds, water reserve funds, and street reserve funds for this project. We didn't identify, like if you look on the street one, we didn't identify any street SDCs as this project. It was all just street reserve funds going towards this project. We also didn't identify any LID funds going towards this project. It was all just street reserve. So we kind of planned for the worst in the capital improvement plan, we recognizing that, we could pay for this entire project out of street funds. But the push for the LID, again, has always been so that those property owners that were getting the benefits, including the recent developments, would be paid kind of their share of the benefits that they were getting. But it's not either or, I guess, is kind of where I'm getting. So, and I've kind of come to that as I'm preparing for next Monday. The city council's got a work session. And so as I was preparing for that and going through the memo a little bit more today, I realized, I think I've probably phrased this as an either or, like we need to have the LID or we don't do improvements. And that's just really not the case. We do have the funds available. It's just a matter of how much the city council wants to spend in street or reserved street dollars project. compared to what the residents and the property owners on the street should be paying.
Yeah, that was not clear to me before. It changes everything. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I think that's on me. It's been a different, because we've been talking LID and how to fund these local projects. But again, when you look at the capital improvement plan, I mean, look out 3 years on streets, and we've got money left after doing 1st Street, 8th Street. We still have, at the end of that 3 years, even with the big price, I think we've got, I don't remember the exact number, I think it's close to $1 million, or I think $1 million going towards the streetscape project next fiscal year. And even after that big lift, we've still got reserve money left over in the street fund. So it's a good place to be. It's a place that the city hasn't been in the past. And because we've been putting money forward these last several years, so we do have some money to capital projects.
So Councilor Causey, give me just a moment, please. Can you just clarify then, so the estimate done by the engineer's report, does that in fact include the costs of putting in, okay, so putting in the sewer and water, is that, no?
It's not part of the engineer's estimate. The engineer has been doing that work, but it's outside of the report for the LID. That's a separate item. The LID is strictly the streets, the stormwater, which we consider part of the street. So street, stormwater, sidewalks, street lights is what gets included with the North 11th Street LID. Water is going to be paid for with water reserve funds, and sewer will be paid for with sewer reserve funds. Neither of those projects, although we're on it, are eligible for SDC funds, so we can't use water SDCs, for example, to go towards that water replacement line. There is some additional capacity, so we may be able to use some, but at this point, we're using those SDCs for the water treatment plant as opposed to towards the smaller water project.
Thank you. And then just one more clarification. So that $220,000 estimated dollars, is that 2022 dollars, or is that 2018 dollars when it might have first hit the CIP? I don't know. I don't have it in front of me, so I don't know where that landed. I'm just asking, has it been adjusted for inflationary costs?
Yeah, generally we're only looking 2 to 3 years out for the CIP, so we don't give inflation a whole lot of credence. What we do is we update the CIP, we kind of sharpen, have a little bit better idea of what the actual cost is going to be. So it's not just a change, it doesn't so much change because of inflation, it changes because we have a little bit better idea of the scope of the project. Engineers look closer, and his estimate's usually a little bit more accurate.
Okay, so you're not anticipating that this project will be under budgeted and end up going over budget just because inflation is relevant in this conversation?
So I think if I'm going off of memory here, so we give me a little bit of lenience here. It looks like Councilor Andrade has it in front of her. I believe for the 11th Street, just the street improvements, I think the estimate was $830,000. Is that correct, Councilor Andrade? Do you have that in front of you?
I see 612.
Yeah. I have it here as well.
So,
it's 612,000. With
that was,
306
about
budgeted
time.
in 2021 and the same amount in 2022.
Right. So that was estimated about this time last year when we were looking at the CIP, and then when the report was done, which was, I believe, in June, July time. The estimate for that came back at 884, I think it was. And so it was, about another $50,000 more than what it was estimated 6 months prior. So there's going to be a little bit of wiggle room in those numbers. They're estimates. And again, we haven't even bid the project yet, so we don't know what the actual construction cost is going to be either. So we tend to be, we tend to like our engineers to be conservative and to kind of round up a little bit and use pretty conservative estimates. But every once in a while you get surprised if you'll get a project when you go out for bid that comes in higher than what you were anticipating. So we try to avoid that, but we do try to be conservative in our estimates.
Thank you. Councilor Causey.
Yep.
Yeah, I wanted to go back. This is a question for Chris regarding the upsizing of the sewer lines and the water lines. I believe in our last meeting, you mentioned that those are PVC lines. Can you explain why they need to be upsized? Is that just new properties or what?
Yeah, it's the new development that's anticipated north. So when the water master plan gets updated, one of the things they look at is our existing system. They look at vacant lots, future development areas, and they want to make sure that any new pipe that goes in is upsized appropriately. Any pipes within the existing system that may be small, they identify those and mark them for getting upsized when there's another project in the vicinity. So, it's one of those, if, I think there's a 5-acre parcel at the north and 11th Street. If they were to put a large, multifamily development of some sort in there, large duplexes or something, that alone might trigger the requirement to upsize the pipe, and we would do it at that time as part of that project. That developer, that property owner might pay a portion of that as kind of offsite improvements that are necessary, but maybe not, right? That's one of those cases where you might even do like some SDC credit if they paid for it and you credit them back because they upsized the pipe for what was needed. But in this case, because we're looking at a street project on 11th Street, it makes sense to go ahead and upsize the pipe at this time, right, before we pave over it. But it's not a project that, if we don't do the paving on North 11th Street, it's not a high priority water project that we would do outside of the street improvements on North 11th Street. And similar with the sewer, we're not having extensive sewer issues with that line, but it's in the range where it needs to be replaced. And so we would do it before we paved the road up there. But we wouldn't do it outside of paving that street. We wouldn't be looking at doing that project.
Thank you.
Okay, so circling back
Yep.
around to gas tax revenues, and thank you, Councilor Causey, for that summary and for doing some doing some deeper digging into those numbers, just to kind of come up with a summary. I'm not sure in all of the review that we've done of alternative funding options that there's any one answer. And I think it's likely to come down to multiple options unless we do in fact pursue like regional local improvement districts or a general obligation bond that elevates all of our streets to the level of infrastructure that we're trying to reach here. So I do think it's something that's viable enough that we should be looking at. If it's a part of that conversation, it's, it's not a grant, but let's imagine that we had an option of a $85,000 grant or $200,000 grant. And again, I understand it's not, but given the similar kind of scenario, I think it would be appropriate for us to look at considering that. And I'd like to include that in one of the recommendations that we send back to the council. So just quick review to the point of those recommendations. Were there any others besides the ones that were previously decided upon? Now we've added gas taxes or gas tax revenue as an option for the council to consider. Were there any other funding options that we wanted to present to the council from this committee? Councilor Causey.
Yes, I just wanted to, I found the agenda item summary of each of the funding options to be very helpful. I certainly agree with the chair that not all of our deliberations are captured in this summary, but I think it is helpful information to present to the council, even if for the purpose of eliminating certain options. I do have some questions regarding each of the options for our city manager, and I wonder if I could go through those now.
I know we've done some of that, so I want to make sure that we're just aware and sensitive time for our other topics of discussion, but yes, go ahead, Councilor Causey.
Okay. I know we had eliminated reimbursement districts and separate road districts in previous discussions. And I think these are good summaries of those options. even if they're not applicable. I did want to point out that in one discussion of our urban renewal districts at the council level, I believe Councillor Lehman expressed that he did not feel they were appropriate for surface streets or residential streets. But I did want to point out that it is specifically mentioned here as a means of funding improvement for inadequate streets or utilities, which is certainly the case here. And I believe that was one of the two viable options out of this list that we had focused on. I did want to ask Mr. Workman with respect to the drawbacks. You mentioned that I'm referring to the information on the top of page 3 here. You mentioned that it requires properties that have already paid for their streets or sidewalks to pay for others, but there really isn't a direct monetary impact to the taxpayer. Can you just explain the comment you made there?
Yeah, and you'll forgive me, I don't have it right in front of me. So top of page 3, which funding source are you referring to?
This is once again urban renewal districts. Okay, and I'll just read you the drawbacks to refresh your memory. The first one is it takes time to establish set rates and start collecting funds. And we certainly discussed that. In the context of our current urban renewal district, it must be approved by other taxing entities. We discussed that at some length. Require additional governing body, public meetings, budget, adoption of a plan. I think we're all aware of that with respect to the current urban renewal district. Reduces funds collected into the general fund. You have to show the benefit to the entire community and individual taxing districts. And the item my question was requires properties that have already paid for their street sidewalks to pay for others. And finally, not likely to be supported for a local street like North 11th. But I'm not sure that the last two are really applicable.
I think they were in contrast to something more like the local improvement district, where on a local improvement district, anybody outside of that local improvement district area is not going to be paying for that installment of the street or the sidewalk, whereas opposed to an urban renewal district, everybody's paying into that. So yeah, I think it was more of a distinction between urban renewal versus LID than saying specifically that within an urban renewal district, those that have already paid are paying again. It's a true statement, but I think it's most relevant when you compare it to a local improvement district, where it's very specific which properties are paying for those sidewalk and street improvements.
Okay, thank you. And why would this approach not likely to be supported for a local street if that local street were part of a broader district?
Yeah, I think the difficulty is showing the benefit to the other jurisdictions. So you're talking the school district, what benefit does the school district get, whether North 11th Street, for example, has paved sidewalks and paved street. It doesn't affect their tax base. It doesn't affect their ability to provide education in their schools, et cetera, et cetera. Now the fire districts, that may be different, right? The fire district may see some clear benefit of having a paved street as opposed to the chip seal, having it wide or whatever. But you go down the list, I guess. The library district, I don't know, would see a whole lot of benefit to them. And again, just go down the list. So I think it's a matter of showing that larger community benefit and how it benefits the community as a whole, because you've really got to get not just our community, but all of these taxing districts have got to be in mind. They've got to see the value to not just the community, but to them, right? And I mean, everybody's got to look out for their self-interest to a certain extent. So on a small local street that's got a pretty small footprint and impact, I just think to sell that on and of itself as a urban renewal zone for just that small area would be problematic. If it was part of a larger area and that was a project within a larger area, that's a different story. But in and of itself, I just think it's too small of an area to have that big of an impact on other taxing districts.
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. But I don't think we would set up an urban renewal district for one street. And if it did capture, for example, several streets in our Safe Route to Schools project, that hopefully would help gain the support of the school district.
Yeah, that would change the scenario quite a bit. I think if it was part of a larger number of projects with the same focus, then you could sell that. I think that would help for sure.
Thank you.
Councilor Andrade.
Just getting at one of the points that Councilor Kazi had mentioned that was listed as a drawback about properties that have already paid for their streets / sidewalks to pay for others. I wonder if we can have a distinction for if have everyone pay for their sidewalks and then not include sidewalks in whatever method we charge people. And that way everyone isn't upset that they're paying for other people's sidewalks. As I don't know if it's worth actually putting it in a summary referral for our work session, but yeah.
So I'm going to pause for just a moment, and Councilor Kazi, give me just a moment here. I want to clarify that we are talking about alternative funding for infrastructure, so street infrastructures, not specifically or isolating this to North 11th Street, although it is a peripheral conversation. And to your point, Councilor Kazi, about, well, I guess to several points that were made here, if this is a local street, I think that is also misrepresented, and we have made this the highest priority street in all of the city of Philomath that needs to be brought up to current standards because it's being used more frequently. It's safe routes to schools conversations. It's a pass-through street. So it's unclear why we're talking about this as a local street that has no bearing, and yet we're actually, let me finish up so I circle back around. I guess the point is we're not talking about urban renewal districts as specific to North 11th Street. And I want to make sure that we continue to keep those isolated. And that's been a challenge along the way. I do think urban renewal districts are worthy of review. I do not think we should just arbitrarily decide that the other taxing districts won't go for it. That's our job, to explain why it has value and why it has merit. And I think we should take that option and let those local taxing districts make that decision, not decide for them. Councilor Kazi, or excuse me, Councilor Andrade, you looked like you had a clarification to make.
Yeah, I didn't think that Councilor Kazi had suggested that it was only for North 11th. I think she meant it for other ones as well. But we can let Councilor Kazi speak for herself. But also, that's what I meant as well, for any project. Have people pay for their sidewalks. Everything else can be done together.
And I think that's a good recommendation also. So thank you for bringing that up. I know we bounced in and out of that one as well in the past. Councilor Kazi?
Yeah, I wonder if I could just ask that for the purpose of the broader discussion and information that might be taken to the council, that we delete the reference to North 11th Street specifically. And let's see, what else was I thinking of?
Are you suggesting striking just that last sentence then?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you're right, it's not, this discussion is not specific to North 11th Street. I'd also like to suggest to Councilor Andrade's point that I think regardless of these funding methods, we do require people homeowners to cover the cost of their sidewalks and maintain their sidewalks. And perhaps that's something that should be noted at the beginning of the discussion piece, that, you know, this is the citizens, the residents, the homeowners' responsibility.
Thank you for that, Councillor Quasi. Did you have more?
Let's see, if I could go on to general fund dollars. I just have a few more questions, so this shouldn't take too long, but again, under drawbacks for general fund dollars, the 2 points noted are reduced funds available for police, parks, administrative support, and other city priorities, and requires properties that have already paid for their streets, sidewalks to pay for others. I assume my question involves the second point again. And I assume that you included this because it's our tax dollars which contribute to the general fund, which would go to pay for this, even though we may have already paid for our sidewalks. Is that correct? Okay.
Sorry. Yes, that's correct. Then same argument as if there had been renewal, just kind of more generally speaking.
Okay.
And
Let's
then
see.
I'll note here, if you'll allow me, and again, this is just, I don't know, maybe a creature of not being used to having some money set aside for these types of projects in the past, but I think one of the glaring omissions here probably should have been right under general fund dollars in this report was our specific utility fund dollars. So within our water fund, we put money aside and have been able to put money aside these last several years. So we do have a reserve there within the sewer fund, within the street fund. That's not something that the city has been used to being able to do. So again, I commend the city council this year and in prior years for seeing the benefit of putting money aside for future use, that we actually have some reserves built up over these last several years where that's an option that we didn't used to have. And so again, I'm kind of a creature of my past experiences, I guess, and I did not consider and should have considered in this report, in addition to general fund dollars, utility fund dollars, so water fund dollars, street fund dollars, sewer fund dollars, et cetera. Those are also a viable source. The trade-offs being every dollar you spend on one project is a dollar you don't have for another project, right? But outside of that trade-off, those dollars are collected by the utility payers, either the water payers or the sewer utility ratepayers, or they're paid through the street fee that is captured every month. And it's captured for the sole purpose of maintaining and improving that infrastructure. Sometimes improving means replacement, right? So we do have that. It's just not something that we had even 5-6 years ago. We just didn't have those reserves, and we do now. So it's, again, it's kind of looking through this and preparing for Monday night's report a little bit more, kind of an aha moment for me that we do have other funds available. It's just a matter of preference, and if the city council wants to spend those dollars on this project as opposed to that project, and it's laid out pretty clearly in the CIP where those dollars are prioritized. It was just not used to having those monies there, but they are there.
Thank you.
I wonder, Councillor Causey, I'm just going to pause for a minute here again. I wonder, I have reservations about the drawbacks when we list the last one in this case, requires properties that have already paid for their streets and sidewalks to pay for others. I think we can use that argument anywhere. Like if you've been here for a long time, you've already paid for a water treatment plant once, right? And now we're asking you to pay for another one. Or if you don't have students in the school system right now, you're still obligated to pay for the school system, the bonding that happens in that case. So this argument of where's the data? I mean, if we're going to make this statement, it requires properties that have already paid for their streets, sidewalks to pay for others. It runs along the lines of that fair share kind of conversation, and it's really more ambiguous than it is helpful in that. Well, what does that mean, right? And are we going to do the same kind of? Are we going to make the same kind of accommodations for folks whose kids aren't in school? are folks who don't use the fire district as much as other, community members do, and are they paying their fair share? I'm concerned about that statement, and it frequently comes up in these discussions, both in text like this, but also in some of our meetings as well. So just a comment, and maybe it's something that we should at least be pointing out is what does that statement mean, and what value does it actually have here, or is it just an opinion? And with that, go ahead, Councillor Causey.
I believe Mr. Workman had a comment.
I was just going to say, I think in contrast to the LID, it's got some value, but just looking at these projects and evaluating them individually, I'm with you. I think we could just remove kind of that last argument. It's really only helpful when you're comparing it to a local improvement district, and outside of that, it doesn't have a lot of value. I agree.
So we'll strike that from this then. Go ahead, Councillor Causey.
Thank you. I see that some of my other marks here are just in agreement with statements that are made. So that concludes my questions. Thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to propose then is for a recommendation coming out of this meeting is that we take this document, we include it in the recommendation, and maybe just add our, I don't know what the correct word is. It's not really red lining. I don't know what they call it, but so reimbursement districts at the end of that section, we can say that the committee did not feel that this was a viable option. At the end of separate road districts, we could add just a little segment that says the committee did not feel that this was a viable option. Urban renewal districts, we can talk about to the extent that we've got notes here, but also including the idea of segmented urban renewal districts or safe routes to school type urban renewal districts, but at least put that option before them. And that, of course, was supported by the city attorney as an option or a viable option. So at the end of urban renewal district, just putting our recommendations, strike this sentence, etc. That's how I'm looking at trying to capture this committee's work. The general fund dollars would also be a recommendation to consider. As I recall, increased utility fees were one that we were hesitant to, just because of the recent increases of this last year. Is that still the consensus of this committee, or are there other considerations for that increased utility fee option? Councillor Causey.
No, I think that was not one of our preferred options.
That's how I remember that. Okay, did you have another comment?
Yes, I just wanted to suggest that with respect to urban renewal districts, we also include the specific entities whose support we have to elicit in order to get this accomplished. The limitations regarding the geographic limitations on urban renewal districts within the city. And any comments we might want to include with respect to the existing urban renewal district. I believe there were discussions as to whether or not we should wait until that urban renewal district had sunset before initiating a second one.
And with the understanding that we can have more than one, but just out of respect for the impacts to our other taxing districts. Am I understanding you correctly?
Yes, I think I also have a fundamental concern about the overall indebtedness of the city. I know that we have a very strong financial rating, but I think it's also important to bear in mind whatever debt we have currently and the limits that should be applied to that debt.
Councillor Causey, thank you. Thank you for that comment. I do think that's relevant to consider. I do also think on the flip side, it's relevant to consider the overall indebtedness that we might levy against our taxpayers if we look at other options. So important to have that be part of the conversation. But with respect to what the ask is for local improvement district participation, it's important to keep that in perspective. Councillor Andrade.
Or Councillor Causey, did you still have more? Oh, okay.
No, thank you.
For the increased utility fees, maybe, I don't know if we should rule it out for the future, but it might be something worth saying, like, this could be an option in the future, but this is not recommended at all for this period in time. Like to help supplement future improvements, infrastructure improvements. And then if it's not added in anywhere else, I would like, if both Chair Bisco and Councillor Causey are good with my suggestion earlier of, taking into account streets being paid for by homeowners, then I would like that included somewhere.
Councillor Andrade, just to clarify, did you mean sidewalks that you'd mentioned?
What did I say? I
You
said
said,
something different.
yeah, you said streets right now. I think that
I meant
right now where you're
sidewalks,
going-
yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
And I support that as well. Councillor Causey, any opinion on that?
I
Well,
believe
excuse me. You did, yes, excuse me.
I believe I previously suggested it be included in the introductory material.
All right, so with that, the citywide local option levy, I believe also that was not a preferred option. Comments from either Councillor Causey or Councillor Andrade? Okay. And then the general obligation bond, we did talk about that, and Council Burrow shared with us, I think, on 2 separate occasions, or at least in one meeting and via email, information on the general obligation bond. I think we landed in that space of not preferred, but was an option that could be considered. But I'd like some more feedback from the committee as well on that, if any. Councillor Causey.
I think as I recall, this was one of the 2 at least most viable options. I don't know if I would use the word preferred, but we should also note that the city does currently already have a general obligation bond. So which kind of goes back to my question about overall indebtedness.
Thank you. And that brings us to local improvement districts, which I think we're well versed on that one. So we'll be including that as a discussion. And that is the remainder outside of adding the local gas tax as a funding mechanism, not necessarily a whole, it's not going to fund everything, but a contributing funding mechanism. Councilor Andrade.
With regards to the local improvement district, if it comes down to it, like, I don't want it, but if it comes down to it, I think it could be done in a way to where, I don't know if this is something to like add to it, to say that this is an option, but thinking about it in terms of like percentages, where by whatever you base it off of, but like, so 25% of it is going to be, paid for by all of the residents in Philomath because a lot of people use it. 25% of it is from the city because of the park and all the people who go to it. And then like 50% are like, it goes to the residents on the street or something like that. And then divvy it up accordingly. Those are just random percents, but just thinking about it in terms of that, it might be something we could work with if we in fact go with a local improvement district.
Thank you, Councilor Andrade. I do think that's a really good summary of how local improvement districts are intended to function, which is based on benefit of the user. And that's something that, so for anybody listening who has not attended the last council meeting, the local improvement district on North 11th Street will be brought to the council in a work session on the 10th of January. And I would expect a broader discussion of funding, concerns, different options. Hopefully the council will come to some resolution, or if not, come to, we need to have more discussion on that. I don't know how much time we're going to have to actually dig in deep here. But the local improvement district is obviously a broader conversation. So I'm happy to embed that into this recommendation as well. But please bring that up on Monday in the work session also. And with that, that is the remainder of our unimproved streets funding options review. I'll get together that document and should be able to have that put together for the council, but obviously won't be in the packet. And I don't know, Chris, we're not expected to be talking about alternative funding, although I think it would benefit that work session. So I guess I answered my own question. With that, we'll move forward to the North 11th Street LID conversation. Actually, I'll back up just one moment. So the improved streets funding options, I hope will be discussed by, at least peripherally, by the work session by the city council. But in the December meeting, it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is how I heard this, that the council is going to be they're going to be moving this discussion to the Planning Commission for review. Is this correct? We moved one of these discussions to the Planning Commission. Councillor Causey.
The Planning Commission already had a brief, I won't say brief, an hour-long discussion of it, which reinforced and clarified a number of issues. And the questions that were put before the Planning Commissions were the ones that I raised in the last council meeting. And I think the Planning Commission, from my perspective, represents a broad cross-section of the community. And there were one or two members who, after listening to a description of local improvement districts, didn't really feel they could comment on it because they were not sufficiently well-versed in it, which I think reinforced to me the complexity of this issue. I mean, all of us have been dealing with this intimately for the last 6 to 12 months. So we're very familiar with it, but it takes a while to wrap your head around this thing and to consider all the ways that it could work or might not work. There were a variety of opinions that kind of ran the gamut, both about LIDs and specifically about subsidizing developers in the community. One of the members commented that he had no problem subsidizing developers. One member commented that she did not think the city should be allowed to initiate LIDs. I will say I shared that opinion myself, but I think there are circumstances under which it could be a viable option. One member expressed that they didn't feel that any property owner in Paloma should have to pay for anything with respect to streets, sidewalks, or otherwise. And let's see, one member expressed that they didn't feel that homeowners put the value in sidewalks that is commensurate with the cost of sidewalks today. They didn't think the assessment was worth it for a sidewalk. What else? Oh, and one committee member said that he did feel that homeowners should share in the cost of city improvements, of street improvements, because they do add value to your home. So for me, it reinforced the complexity of the issues and the strong feelings that people have about these issues. And from my own perspective, regardless of how 11th Street is funded, my biggest concern is the decision whether or not we're going to subsidize developers in this instance and set a precedent for subsidizing developers who we infill within the city. Because if we do, and as I said in the Planning Commission, I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but if we do, it will dramatically change the fabric of our city. It will become more densely populated because it will be more economically advantageous for a developer to buy a property and put up more dense housing. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. From my perspective, that's what happens to cities. They become more dense. And I know Councillor Andrade has spoken several times about the need for more housing and the need for more dense housing in our urban area. But my concern is that we make it a thoughtful and carefully defined decision, and one where we prescribe the parameters and not just move forward with this project and get it done. I don't think it would be that hard to define the parameters. We certainly saw in the information that Mr. Knudsen provided that other communities are doing this. I don't think it would be hard to define, for example, the zoning where this could be done and the circumstances under which the funding would be provided and the sources for funding. But I do think it should be a thoughtful discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Causey. With that, I do want to just point out a couple things for this committee to acknowledge on local improvement districts and North 11th Street specifically. I did have the opportunity to go drive the property, and the last recommendations were to do the north side, to consider the proposal to do half of the improvements on the north side of North 11th Street. I found that to be, it's a very, very short stretch of road. I don't know if you've been on that street, but it's quite short before we get to the Quail Glen where we kind of head off that direction, and it's been improved to some extent. But I didn't see any sense in doing part of the street and not all of it, because it is the south part of that street that is just not, it's not functional or usable if we are going to measure it against safe routes to schools and pedestrian traffic and high use because, or higher use because of the park. I unplanned, it was not my intent, but had an opportunity to speak to 3 individuals on that street. And they did express to me that there was a far greater increase in pedestrian traffic that isn't park related. Their opinion was that that kind of pedestrian traffic, so bike and kids and families, was cutting through rather than using 9th Street as a passway as a matter of safety. I can't speak to that as a fact, but I did want to make note of that because it was mentioned by more than one of them. And also want to make sure that we acknowledge the difference between a subdivision development and somebody that is actually building a triplex on a piece of property. I do not think they're necessarily the same thing or fundamentally the same thing. If we are going to look at infilling the city, and we're going to look at how House Bill 2001 really set the stage from the state as how we want to see our communities develop and how we create what is and becomes more affordable housing, it is a topic that we should be looking at as a council. And not necessarily expecting that a street should bear the brunt of that kind of development, but being mindful that a subdivision like Heather Glen in this case, which has its own conditions of approval, is not really, as I understand it, allowed to even participate in an LID. They're already obligated to street improvements. So it's kind of that muddied, watered space again, where there's a lot of unclarity. I think it's important for the council to look at that. To the point that we look at benefits and developers, Mr. Workman has actually fine-tuned a little bit the property on North 11th Street, being a 5-acre piece of property. At a minimum, that is 4 houses, could be up to 25 according to Echo Northwest per acre, depending on what the zoning looks like and the development could look like. Certainly that property should be bearing a portion of this development cost, or the local improvement districts that we have proposed. And I have not seen evidence that there's a 5-acre piece of property in that conversation. Also to the 560 North 11th Street, also to the property behind the church on Pippa Glen, that also is a larger property that will likely result in more houses that will impact this street. So it goes back to that benefit gained. It is certainly not just new park users. It is certainly not just Knutson's property. It is certainly not even just Heather Glen. There's a lot of other influence on this street, and I don't consider this a local street or a back street or anything else. This has become a fairly active street. Certainly with development, it would do so. Another comment that came up, I have not been able to vet this out fully, but I've heard it now twice in 2 very different conversations over a period of several years, is when Quail Glen was developed, what's been told by these individuals that live on the street told to me is that Quail Glen was supposed to be responsible for the development of the street. So if that's true, it's just a bigger conversation of how do we hold accountability to street infrastructure by developers before they get certificates of occupancy, and making sure that infrastructure is in place beforehand, not after, and then we have default situations. And that has also happened in other places in Philomath. So bigger conversations. Hopefully this council is willing to take them on and kind of raise all ships, whether it's housing or infrastructure costs or just development in the city in general. So the North 11th Street LID agenda item will be moving to, from here forward, I believe, will be moving to the work session before the council and is now in the hands of the council. I see no other hands from the committee members on this one, so I'll move on to the staff updates. I did request at the last meeting to get some information on the specs of the water reservoir from staff. I did not receive that, so I'm hoping that Chris, you're able to give. That's actually not on the agenda specific, but I do want to make sure. Do we have do we know what the size of this water reservoir is? Because I've seen a large range of what pre-stressed concrete water reservoirs or water tanks might look like, and I haven't been able to find that information to confirm it. And I've done a fair amount of looking in city records. So do you have that information? I know I asked that once before.
I don't, sorry, I apologize. I'll find that out this week, get that emailed out to you. My apologies.
Okay, and could you please email it to the whole committee then? I've asked in writing, asked the last meeting, and I'm not seeing it yet. I do think it's appropriate that we know what that is. Can't find it in the records, so which seems odd to me that the water system master plan doesn't even have that information in it, nor does it have anything that the public works has been provided up through this year, in this year. I also requested a water system master plan projects update, and I see that you included 8 pages from the water system master plan, but I've seen those. So I was hoping and aiming at, my request was, where are we at with respect to those 3 different priority lists? So it gives a context of, what's left, what's outstanding for spending. Are you able to provide any information on that with the document that's in our packet?
Yeah, I think we've only done 2 projects since the water master plan has come out. Obviously the biggest priority projects, priority 1A is the water treatment plant and 2 is the reservoir. I believe the only project that we've done on there was in conjunction with 18th Street. I believe that's a priority 3 project. Sorry, I don't have it right in front of me. But we did some improvements to the water line there on 18th Street so it could connect over to the Northernwood project. And the other one, Kevin would shoot me if he was here because he knows that I'd have to double check, but they're only priority, they were priority 3 projects. We've not done any of the other priority 1 or priority 2 projects.
Okay, and I don't actually, I'm just trying to look at priority 3 projects. You said North 18th Street, so are we calling that transmission mains? I guess the priority,
No.
oops. Hang on. Yeah,
I
the
think
prior,
the focus of tonight that was that we have not done any of the priority 1 or 2 to priority 2 projects. All we've done so far is engineering for the water treatment plant and the water reservoir.
right. And so my question of clarity was on the priority 3 list, you mentioned 18th Street. I don't see that on, there's only 4 priority 3 projects listed here that I see. So it's the North Transmission Main, the South Transmission Main, Starlight Village Service, Maryland Drive, obviously none of those. So they are
No,
not,
maybe it was I'd have to look again. I apologize. And maybe it wasn't even a priority list. Maybe it was just a conversation with Public Works Director of the water projects that we've done and since the updated water master plan came out. So it may not even be a priority 3 listed project. That was just a water project that we had done. So, but again, the point being, the top priority projects are the treatment plant and the reservoir, and we've been doing engineering on that and are obviously set to start construction this summer.
okay, thank you. If you're able to just confirm that and send that in an email to this committee also, I'd appreciate that. And then the last thing that's on the staff updates that was requested, and it's before I realized that this had already gone out to the city. If we received it in our inbox as counselors, I did not see it, but I saw the press release later on the water reservoir site review of historical or culturally significant artifacts, and that's posted on the city website. And my understanding is there were none. So just a clarification, are we then proceeding with that project? Is there any final steps that need to take place after that press release statement?
We're still waiting to hear back for sure from Department of State Lands that they were satisfied with our archaeologist report. We've not got that assurance yet.
Thank you. Councilor Andrade.
For the specs or figures or whatever of the reservoir, can you just send that to all of council, since I don't think I will be on this committee this next year.
Sure.
And I would still like it.
Good point. Thank you, Councilor Andrade.
Thank you.
Any other comments then on the agenda items or other business for the Public Works? Councilor Causey.
I just wanted to ask, and perhaps it's a rhetorical question, I hope not, but of the high priorities street improvements, 9th Street is high on the list, and it's certainly one that we've discussed at length. Is there any reason why we cannot install a stop sign at 9th and Pioneer?
I'm not a traffic engineer, but I think there are some concerns there. It's worth having the conversation about, but it's not a slam dunk. There's some grade issues there. Obviously, you're coming down a steep hill. You've got any type of load back behind you. Stopping on downhills or uphills is pretty difficult. So maybe, but we'd have to look at it more.
Who makes that decision?
Well, a lot of people would make that decision. So it'd go through a review process, and yeah, at the end of the day, we'd want City Council to sign off on installing that if that's what we want to do.
It just seems like a simple solution to help address some safety concerns there. If people know that they have to stop and there's a stop sign ahead.
Well, and Councilor Causey, thank you for that. I'm just curious. So I understand that there's a slope there, but that's not a truck approved route. So you're talking just personal vehicle size trucks and small trailers or boats or RVs. It seems like given adequate warning that there's a stop sign there would certainly increase the safety at that corner. It is a difficult corner, no question. Counselor.
Again, I'm not really prepared to address it other than I guess I could argue that it would be every intersection in town would be safer if they all had stop signs, but we don't put stop signs at every intersection. So there is an argument to be made that sometimes we don't put stop signs in even if it would be safer. So what is the reasoning for not putting the stop sign somewhere as opposed to what's the reasoning for putting the stop sign somewhere? So there are reasons, and it's worth looking at. It's just something that we haven't looked at that closely.
Okay, thank you. I'd appreciate it if we could look at that.
Counselor, okay. I'm just curious to that question. What would the review process look like for something like that? Clearly 9th Street's been brought by community members before the council before. Certainly those of us that drive it know that it's less than ideal for safety wise. So what is that review process that you mentioned?
I believe the police committee is looking at North 9th Street specifically, and I believe they're actually coming out with a program that would identify and lay out a policy that the city would follow when concerns about specific local streets are brought up. And I believe that their next committee meeting, Chair Nielsen was anticipating bringing kind of a final draft back for review that would come onto the city council, hopefully within the next month or two. But at this point, it's the police committee that's looking at it.
I'll bring it up on Tuesday.
What's that?
I'll bring it up on Tuesday. That's our next meeting.
I think that's.
Oh, but I'm not on that committee. I apologize.
Right.
I'll ask them to raise it.
And I think that police committee meeting for next week got bumped. There's a conflict with chief's schedule, so I think it'll be that week after.
Okay. All the more time to prepare.
So with that then, thank you for those questions, Councillor Causey, and hopefully that can come before the council as a priority safety issue, along with it being a priority street upgrade infrastructure issue. I have no other business on here except just some closing remarks. So I want to thank this committee for the work that we attempted to achieve here and in some cases achieved. The mayor has seen fit to rearrange our Public Works Committee and has recommended that Councillor Causey, Councillor Lowe, and Councillor Lehman replace this current committee arrangement. I will say that that is an interesting observation. And I will, as the chair of this committee, also like to express that I don't think in all of my time in serving in public service and being in business have I ever experienced anything quite so uncooperative and uncollaborative of an environment as this space. I was not allowed to build the agenda. I had little input or opportunity in input of meetings, not none, but very, very little. We were restricted in topics that were allowed to be discussed. Certainly there is enough record to evidence that there are concerns about minutes. And as is evidenced once again tonight, we're operating without either adequate information or requests of information that were provided in advance of this meeting, either via email or at previous meetings. To that end, I do believe that the mayor's decision is driven by something that is unclear and not been made known to me as the chair of this committee. And I want to make that statement and also make the statement that I did request to be part of this committee as a priority 1 of 4 and have been removed. And so with that, you all who are following these meetings will be in the hands of 3 other counselors come next meeting, whatever that meeting is. I'd like to turn it over to Councillor Andrade for any last thoughts as well.
I just wanted to add to that list that for most of our meetings, we have not been able to have the Public Works Director and staff.
Thank you, Councillor Andrade. So with that, thank you to everybody. We'll close out this meeting, 6:30 p.m. Meeting adjourned.